All right, Nuggets fans, welcome in to Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends over here at Mile High Sports. I'm your host, Ryan Blackburn at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, part of the Mile High Sports Podcast Network, and I'm here. I am ready to discuss the Denver Nuggets. It is a Thursday, as I'm recording this on Wednesday night, but this will drop, of course, on Thursday morning, and very excited to get into this particular topic, which I think is in my wheelhouse. I think you're coming to the right place if you are listening to me on the Christian Braun and Peyton Watson projected contract extensions. We obviously haven't heard anything about this. The window to extend third year players going into their fourth season is at the start of the new league calendar year, which is July 1st. Obviously, there are so many other factors that are going to play into this beyond just, hey, are these guys worth this money? There's a lot of things, and we'll get into different reasons to extend, different reasons to not. We'll also, like, one of the big factors is the fact that Denver doesn't have a general manager right now. They have an interim general manager, and I still don't think that Denver's really close on that yet as of Wednesday night. That might change Thursday, might change Friday, but I do think that there's still a little bit of a ways away from making a final decision. And I know a lot of people are frustrated about it. A lot of people are concerned about it. I share those concerns too, but Denver can control what they can control. Nuggets fans, worry about what you can worry about. And I think that this is one of those topics that whenever a general manager does come in, this will be something that they have to do, whether they actually get it done, whether they go to restricted free agency. Time will tell. But I'm very curious to see what the Nuggets ultimately decide to do on this front. Over the course of Denver's history, they have extended almost all of their players. Every single player that they haven't really extended, they have traded. Um, the notable players, I think, so Nikola Jokic, back when he was getting his rookie extension, because he was a second round pick, it was a little bit different. He could have, like, they declined his option so he could be a restricted free agent, and then they gave him effectively a 5-year max. When Jamal Murray was getting his extension, they effectively gave him a 5-year max. They didn't have to do that. And that was a controversial decision at the time. But much like this year, the cap going up, long term plans for these players, you expect them to be around for a long time. It wasn't that big of a deal that they did that. It was just kind of a gamble. And it was a gamble that ultimately paid off. Denver won a championship, of course, their first in franchise history. The Michael Porter Jr. extension, a little bit more shaky. That one was a little bit too forward by Tim Connolly. He made that extension, and then 9 games into the next season, Michael Porter was shut down, had a third back surgery. That was tough. That was a problem. There were definitely things that Denver could have done better there. I think Tim Connolly could have towed the line a little bit more on something like that, especially to try to protect them from the injury. And there are some things that are even now hurting Denver because of that extension then, and because Tim Connolly didn't protect himself with the foresight in order to really figure that out. And yet Denver won a championship, so it's hard to really criticize too much. Um, Aaron Gordon, they have extended multiple times. Yes, the same year that they got the Michael Porter extension done, they also got an Aaron Gordon extension done. They gave him the most amount of money that they could on an extension. It was criticized at the time. Then they won a title. Kind of how it works. Then they extended him along with Jamal Murray this last offseason. They didn't give him the most amount of money that they could. Aaron Gordon kind of took what was a relatively team-friendly construct, a little bit different as a veteran extension than a rookie extension, but ultimately they paid him a lot of money, and he's going to make, not this year because he opted into his player option to get it done, but then they effectively gave him a 40% raise in that next season to get him a 3-year, $110 million extension on top of what he did this year. So Denver has a history, even with Zeke Naji, like Denver has a history with giving players extensions when they can. Jamal Murray, they just gave an extension this past offseason, gave him the most amount of money that they could. In retrospect, probably should have towed the line a little bit more, probably should have played a little bit more hardball. And with that in mind, Denver, of course, now has two more decisions that they have to make: Christian Braun and Peyton Watson. Christian Braun and Peyton Watson are not in the core four. Christian Braun did start and play a whole bunch of games as a starting shooting guard for this year, and he played well. Like, I put out the graphic that I did in the last show, and Christian Braun had the 25th highest number of estimated wins added from EPM, dunks and threes EPM stat. And it's a stat that I trust in terms of the kind of general value that you're going for. And like, it has Jokic very high. It had Murray at about the 40th best player, had Michael Porter about the 64th, and it had Christian Braun 25th. So it valued him pretty high. And yet a lot of people and a lot of Nuggets fans are understandably a little bit queasy about paying Christian Braun $30 million a year on his next contract, because they, like, you see the number 30 million and you're like, okay, that's a guy that you're really committing to. You are really serious about. And it just doesn't surprise me that people have now, like, this has now become a little bit of a story. And so the Nuggets historically would just give Christian Braun the deal that they find is fair. They would give Peyton Watson the deal that they find is fair. And they wouldn't really worry too much about the details. They wouldn't worry too much about, is this really going to hurt us down the line? Maybe, but it's about keeping a player locked in and keeping the asset under tow, giving yourself as much flexibility as possible to make a future trade if necessary. But more than anything, it's just about keeping the band together. And if you've heard from Josh Kroenke, if you've heard from David Adelman, you know that those guys believe in the internal development. They have talked about that, discussed this, and think that that is the best way to go for a team like Denver. And how do you internally develop? Well, you develop your young players. You play them more, you pay them eventually, and then they take over larger roles. That's just how it works. So, in theory, you would pay Christian Braun to be your next third or fourth best player. You would pay Peyton Watson to eventually maybe take over as a starter even. But in order to get those deals done, you kind of have to pay a premium in this rookie extension window. See, these teams and these players, they have this opportunity to come together after the third season. You have that opportunity until the beginning of the fourth season. So from July 1st to about October 22nd, so October 24th, somewhere around there, whatever the day before the regular season starts. And teams will make those deals all the way up until the deadline. So don't be surprised if this takes a little bit of time, if this is something that isn't the first thing that happens July 1st, July 2nd, whatever. It wouldn't surprise me if this is something that drags on a little bit or doesn't get done at all. Going back and looking historically, I believe there have been maybe like 7 deals last year, 11 deals the year before, 8 deals the year before that. So you're probably looking at about 8 to 10 on average every single season. And I think that you're probably going to get a lot from the 2022 class, because there was a really good class. And Christian Braun is a part of that. Peyton Watson is a part of that. These guys probably do deserve to be extended and paid. It just depends on how they value themselves. And so what I wanted to do, now that these guys are extension eligible, I want to talk to people about the salary cap increasing. Right now, I think this is really important to figure out. Right now, the salary cap is $140 million, which is pretty high. Next season, starting July 1st, that new league year, it is projected to go up 10%. And so what that means, it's going to go up about 14 million. About 154 million, 154.6 million is the actual projection there. And that's not even the year that Christian and Peyton would start their new extensions. That would be the year after, when it increases another 10% projected. And so When people talk about 30 million, they are not on the same page as the way the salary cap is going right now. And I understand 30 million is a lot to a lot of people, but with the NBA becoming more valuable, with these numbers continuously going up, everybody's making funny money right now. Basically, 10% of the cap in 2026-27 is $17 million. 10% of the cap this season was $14 million. 10% the year before, or like this past year, was 13.6 million. 14.05 is the actual kind of breakdown there. And so what that means to me and what that should mean to you as Nuggets fans is that 30 million doesn't necessarily mean the same as it does before. 30 million, if you remember Mike Conley when he back in 2016, if you remember the salary year of 2016 was crazy. Mike Conley made the most amount of money of anybody and was paid 5 years, 151 million. It was a big deal. You know who just got that contract in an extension this last year? Jalen Johnson, who's never made an All-Star game. He might make it going forward, but he also might not. And that deal from Atlanta was pretty universally considered good, like for pretty much everybody involved. 30 million a year, not that bad if you believe that a guy can be a part of your future, if you believe that they can be an all-star. And even going forward, like 5 years, 150 million, which was crazy, it's not going to be crazy in these next couple of years. So I think that's important to remember in this process as you start to hear numbers, as you start to see contracts being signed. That's why the numbers are so high. You have to look at it as a percentage of the cap. So with that in mind, take a look at some of these numbers here. If you are listening along, I am sorry. This is a grouping of players that are like from an extension pool, all of the extensions that have been signed over the last 3 seasons, last 3 off seasons, back to Nasir Little and like that 4-year, $28 million deal, which everybody's like, why did Nasir Little get that money? Turns out that was a bad deal. But it was only 5.1% of the cap in that season in 20, like when he first would have been there for year 2023. For Zeke Naji, bad deal, 32 million and $1 actually. That's a thing that's on Spot Track. He's making 4 years, $32 million and one. On average about 8 million, 5.69% of the cap. It's not a large contract by any stretch of the word, especially when it comes to extensions. These are the 3 least valuable extensions: Nasir Little, Peyton Pritchard, Zeke Naji. It's very rare for extensions to be that small. And yet, Denver's, of course, going to regret that. They thought that they were getting Peyton Pritchard. They thought that they were getting Aaron Nesmith, who's the next highest guy on that particular list, making 7.82% of the cap in year 1 of his extension. But that's a 3-year, $33 million extension, which sounds pretty good when you're getting a starter in the NBA Finals. It doesn't obviously work out that way a lot of the time. You could be getting Moses Moody, who's like, eh. You could be getting Corey Kispert, who's eh. Could be getting Brandon Clark, who's good, but now you're starting to creep up there at 9.19% of the cap in the first year of that extension. So what this like is reflective of, you have to start looking at these deals, especially prospective deals, as a percentage of the cap. You can't be looking at it as 10 million or 20 million or 30 million or whatever the per year value is. You have to look at it as what it actually counts against the cap for. These are the kinds of players that you could get for 5 to 10% of the cap in year 1. Denny Avdia would be great. Josh Green would not. Cole Anthony, Brandon Clark, all right. Aaron Nesmith, great. Peyton Pritchard, great. Zeke Naji, And that's the problem that you run into. Now, these are some of the players. The only players that signed for between the salary cap of the percent of the cap for 10 to 15% of what that incoming salary number would be. Keldon Johnson, Kevin Porter Jr., Onyeka Okongwu, Isaiah Stewart. I think that two of those four deals are really good, and Okongwu and Stewart. The Johnson deal is okay. The Kevin Porter Jr. Deal ultimately not good, but for a lot of different reasons. And so these are kind of the mid-tier ones that I think teams could talk themselves into, but might not necessarily be great for everybody. Now, these are the ones that are in the 15 to 20% range of the salary cap. Up top, you've got RJ Barrett, 4-year, $107 million deal back in 2023 was about 19.67% of the salary cap. Jalen Suggs, a deal that was just signed, 19.46%. Jalen Johnson, who I just mentioned, 5 years, $150 million, $30 million per, was at 19.4% of the cap last year. Devin Vassell, Jaden McDaniels, Trey Murphy III, DeAndre Hunter. These are your third to fourth starter on a playoff team. Third to fourth starter. If they are your first or second option, you're in bad shape. If they're your third option, you're okay. If they're your fourth option, now you're starting to cook with gas. So that's the impression I think you have to have in this situation. And now you go to the big ones. Over the course of the past 3 years, all of the rookie extensions that have been signed between basically last 3 years between 20 and or at least 20%. I don't know if any have been higher than that. Am I crazy? I got to be crazy because there was a Cade Cunningham deal that was higher than this. Tyler Hero, Jalen Green, Jordan Poole, Alperen Şengün, Desmond Bane. These are 5 of the deals that were signed over the course of the last 3 years, kind of in that 22 to 28% of the cap. If you are the Tyler Hero deal, that one's okay. And then they extended him again just now, I believe, and that one's a little bit wonky. But the Alperen Şengün deal should be pretty good. Desmond Bane, they're thinking about trading him. Jalen Green, not happy about it. Jordan Poole, not happy about it. Clearly, they moved him very quickly. So this is what people have to remember in this. So when we come back, I'm going to share some very, very valuable numbers on why the NBA. Oh, I'm not I didn't want to hide that. No, we're removing you. Okay. Sorry about that. When we come back, I'm going to share some valuable numbers on the salary cap and what a 4-year deal for Christian Braun and Peyton Watson should actually look like. We'll be right back here on Pickaxe and Roll. All right, we're back. Pickaxe and Roll, Ryan Blackburn. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Apologies for that little teaser there at the end of this last segment. I think that hopefully those numbers and thinking about those percentages should give you kind of an idea of where Christian Braun and Peyton Watson should be. How I would value each of those guys. I think that Christian, like this last year, he was the 5th best player. And you could argue 4th, you could argue 6th, you could maybe even argue 3rd, depending on how you value different things for what the Nuggets have done this past season. I think that clearly going forward, you would like to be able to pay Christian Braun like your 5th best player. And that would be great because if you are Denver, if you're trying to keep your starting lineup together, you would like to be able to pay him like the 5th member of that starting lineup. And yet, I think there is also a world where you could pay him a little bit more than that if you believe that Michael Porter is not long for the starting unit. If you break up his salary, Would it be the worst thing in the world for Christian Braun to make the fourth most amount of money on the team? No, especially as he continues to develop and get better. The question is, how much better can he get? What can you expect him to grow into? And how would it look like if he didn't have Nikola Jokic kind of feeding him passes the entire time? So I think these are all fair questions. With Peyton Watson, I think you're paying him like a sixth man. I think you're paying him like a seventh man, somewhere in that general range. You're not paying him like a starter. And so from the percentages, if you want to go back and look at some of these other ones that happened, the Denny Avdia one, for like the Denny Avdia contract, it was 4 years, 55 million back in 2024, but it was 9.78% of the cap in year one. That seems pretty reasonable for Peyton Watson. The Isaiah Stewart deal, 4 years, 60 million back in 2024. That was 10.67% of the cap. Even the Keldon Johnson one, if you wanted to get really aggressive, but I don't necessarily feel like they have to get that aggressive on this particular one in order to get it locked in. Peyton Watson has been pretty good, but I wouldn't call him great. I would say that his offense is still very spotty. His defense is very good, but he hasn't really started that much. He's probably started, I want to say, 15 games in his entire NBA career, and he hasn't had that much opportunity, of course, to start more than that. But he also hasn't earned those minutes over the top of somebody else in the Nuggets rotation. So I think between these two lists, you're probably looking at about 10% for those guys. And for Christian Braun, I think he's a better player than Keldon Johnson. I think he's a better player than Onyeka Okongwu, Isaiah Stewart, Kevin Porter Jr. So you start going up the list a little bit. Is he a better player, better, more valuable than RJ Barrett? Maybe. Jalen Suggs? Probably not. Jalen Johnson? No, I don't think so. Devin Vassell? I don't think so, especially with where he was after his third year. Jaden McDaniels, is he about there? Maybe. Trey Murphy, is he about there? Maybe. It wouldn't surprise me at all. So you're talking about in the 18 to 19% range for the salary cap in year one. DeAndre Hunter, I think, is actually a very accurate place for where Christian Braun should be. Both of those guys were older rookies. Both of those guys averaging about 14, 15 points per game in their third year. And it wouldn't surprise me if that's kind of the metric that they go off of. Trey Murphy III, same thing. And you see that 4-year, $112 million deal for Trey Murphy III. I think that's actually a very accurate number. Just raw number there. So we go to percentage of the cap in 2026-27. What I wanted to equate here, as I mentioned before, the salary cap in 2026-27 will be $170 million. That would be the first year that this Christian Braun or Peyton Watson extension would kick in. And I think that's very valuable because, like we've talked about with extensions for Jamal Murray and Michael Porter before, they're playing at lower numbers before they sign an extension. When that extension kicks in, then you can start talking about how much money they actually make. But I just remember having those conversations, especially back during the 2019-20 season after Murray had signed that extension in 2019. And then he had the bubble. And then everybody's like, oh, sick. We've got this guy locked up for another 5 years. That's great. And I was like, yeah, of course, because that's just how this works. That's how development works. You take your time. So 5% of the cap in 2026-27 works out to about $8.5 million per season. If you were to do that for 4 years, it would be about 4-year, $34 million deal. That's closer to the Zeke Naji amount of money. That's not where these guys are. 7.5%, about $12.75 million, about a 4-year, $51 million deal. That's closer for Peyton. I'll say that. That's a closer number for Peyton that if you got him there, you would feel pretty good. Then we get to the 10% number. 4 years, $68 million. That's about $17 million per season. I could see that being something that Denver actually signs Peyton Watson for. but it's not quite where you're going to get Christian Braun based off of what we're talking about. Remember, we talked about the kind of the 18% threshold. And you scroll all the way down, you go to 10%, 12.5% is about 21 million a year, 15% is about 25 million a year, 17.5% is about 29.7 million, about 30 mil. And that's really where you're going to be. And like people have to fully internalize that this is just how money works. This is how inflation works in the NBA. And yet, if you're the Nuggets, you can't just look at this and say, oh, because of inflation, we're going to give these guys this money. I think if you're the Nuggets, you have to continue to try to work for good deals for yourself. You have to say, hey, we're going to pay you, we're going to pay you favorably. But the extension is as much of a risk for the team as it is for the player. If you sign it too early, like hypothetically, I remember when Will Barton was signed to a 3-year, $9 million contract by Denver. And then in the first year of that contract, so thoroughly outplayed it back in like 2015, 2016, somewhere around there, that it was one of the best value contracts in the entire NBA. And everybody was like, holy cow, how did you get this guy for this low amount of money? And you could tell that Will Barton was like, crap, wish I hadn't signed that contract. Wish I hadn't signed that extension. That was bad, because if you had bet on yourself, you might be making 10 million a year. Might be making 12 million a year, somewhere in that general range. So if you're Denver, like let's say you're Peyton Watson, do you really want to commit to a salary of let's say it's a 4-year, 50 million deal? Like that would be great. $50 million is awesome. But let's say Michael Porter gets hurt, you slide into the starting position, and then you never relinquish the job because you're so good. And then you feel really good about it. You probably missed out on a lot of money, because a starting player, as we talked about, probably going to make about 25 million a year, double what his salary would be going forward if he signed for 12.5. So this is why the inflation matters for both the player and the team. They are going to try to push for as much as they can, but if you're the team, you have to try to get the best deal for yourself. So without further ado, this is the numbers that I would project for Christian Braun and Peyton Watson. If I were the Nuggets, if I were Christian Braun and Peyton Watson, these are numbers that I think I'd be pretty happy with. Let's start with Christian Braun. 4 years, $112 million. I just had it as a flat $28 million per season. You could escalate it. You could de-escalate it. You could do it in a variety. You could stair step it a little bit, where you have a low number and then a high number and then a low number. There are certain rules for how you maneuver those things, but overall, the value on the contract would be 4 years, $112 million. If you recall, that was effectively how much Trey Murphy is making. And I think that's a pretty good deal that a lot of people are pretty happy with. Now, a lot of people are thinking, yeah, Trey Murphy's making 21 points per game, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, some solid defense, but really good shooting. Is Christian Braun really worth that? Well, it's a little bit of an inflated deal, because one, it's being signed a couple years later. I think that Trey Murphy deal, if we go back to it, oh no, that was signed 2025. So that was signed this past offseason. You're probably getting that was 18.1% of the salary cap for this upcoming season. It's really not that, 18.1% would be over 30 million. This is not over 30 million. This would be about 28 million. So Denver's getting a pretty reasonable discount here. If they can get him at 16.5% of the starting salary in the first season, I think that's a pretty reasonable number. 4 years, 112 million. Now, people will probably look at that and think, oh man, are we sure that Christian can grow into that? I think that's a perfectly reasonable number, to be honest. I think that is, if you believe that he's going to be your starting shooting guard of the future, then I think that's just kind of the going rate. And it's also enough money that I feel like Christian isn't necessarily going to be quibbling. His agency's not going to be quibbling about, oh man, we wish we could have gotten 30 million. You're still locking in 28 million a season. And if you're Christian, if you're his agency, that wasn't guaranteed. It was never guaranteed that he was ever going to be a starter in the NBA. So this would be, I think, a pretty solid extension for him. And there's always a possibility that, like, if he doesn't sign this, then he could go back to being a bench player or get moved. And then another team is like, hey, we're not really feeling Christian Braun at 28 million a year. We'd feel him at 20 million a year. That sounds pretty reasonable because we don't think he's going to be a starter for us. But for Denver, with Jokic, I think it makes sense because of how those guys fit together and what Christian does for the team. So that's the number that I came to. For Peyton Watson, it's a little bit more difficult because these smaller kind of mid-level exceptions, which you are like, it's not quite that small because there are other players that have gone for about 10% of the cap, of course. But you don't see those that often early. You see them a little bit later in the summer because a lot of times these agents are looking to use their leverage, use their wait time, and they can always take it to restricted free agency and be fine. But if you're Peyton Watson and you start to see 17 million per year on the table, and you're his agency and seeing 17 million per year for Peyton Watson, who has never really started in the NBA before, I think that's a pretty reasonable deal. I think that's a pretty reasonable contract to figure out. Like I compared before, somebody like an Isaiah Stewart or Denny Avdia, I think that's a pretty reasonable deal. Denny Avdia got 4 years, 55 million a couple off seasons ago, 9.78 million percentage of the cap, and Isaiah Stewart got about 10.67% of the cap in a 4-year, $60 million deal a couple seasons ago as well. So that is why I think these numbers both make sense. And if you're Denver, now you have to start doing the evaluation process of, all right, if we pay these guys a combined 45 million, which is what it is, combined 45 million over the course of these next 4 seasons, 2026, 2027, 2028, 2029, and 2030. If you're going to pay them for those years, how are you going to handle it? How are you going to work your way around it? Can you pay those guys that money and pay Nikola Jokic and pay Jamal Murray and pay Aaron Gordon and pay Michael Porter? The answer is probably not. So if you sign both of these guys to extensions, you're effectively saying Denver's going to have to break up the core 4 at some point. They might have to do that anyway because of the way the salary cap and the second apron is working. But what I'll say, I want to make sure that people recognize this as an important point, and that's the last thing we'll talk about. Denver in these last 2 off seasons with Bruce Brown, with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, has let players go for nothing, and they haven't been compensated for it. With Denver up against the salary cap, up against the second apron, and having to battle that, especially without the draft picks, they do not have a lot of mechanisms to add players. What they do have is the ability to retain players. They can retain their players for as much as they want to. If they have their bird rights, they can pay into the second apron. They can pay as much as they want. The problem that you're going to run into, of course, is that there's a repeater tax. There is penalties for being in the second apron. If you want to be in the second apron for multiple years, then holy cow, like you're probably dropping your draft pick all the way down to the 30th pick over the course of the next 5 years. Like there are some serious penalties for paying a whole bunch of money. And yet you have to do it. Like this is a requirement. You have to retain your talent. Now the question is when. The question is when you have to do this. You do not have to do this now. This is not a requirement. This window is an opportunity from July to October for teams and players to come together and have an opportunity to extend their player early on in the process, prevent them from getting even close to restricted free agency. But the fact is that there's still restricted free agency. If Christian Braun and the Nuggets don't come to an agreement, the Nuggets will still have the first right to match any contract that Christian Braun gets, as long as they have his his 4th-year option, and they lock him into that. They extend a qualifying offer, things like that. They'll have opportunity for restricted free agency. Same thing with Peyton Watson, and I would expect them to give that to both of those guys. If they don't sign them to extensions, they will very likely extend a qualifying offer, retain them for whatever they get on the open market, and probably play hardball with them then. It's why you see all of these extensions now. You don't see all of them, but you see a lot of teams extending. Now, one team that didn't is the Philadelphia 76ers with Tyrese Maxey. They waited on Tyrese Maxey's extension for as long as possible. They effectively told him, hey, we're going to give you the most amount of money that we can. We promise you that, but we need you to wait, and then we'll give it to you so that we can pay Paul George. You got to get that decision right, of course. It doesn't always work out. But if there is an opportunity for Denver where they want to, hypothetically, let's say maneuver money to go try to get Luka Doncic on the open market, I don't think their books are so dirty they're not going to be able to do that. But hypothetically, if they were, that's a reason to wait on players like Christian Braun and Peyton Watson, because you need those guys at their lower cap number, their qualifying offer number, and not at $28 million if you're Christian Braun, not at $17 million if you're Peyton Watson. Those guys' qualifying offers would probably be like $8 million and $6 million respectively, somewhere in that general range. I don't actually know. I'd have to check that, but it would be way less. And so that's the rub. In this situation, Denver is kind of in a really tough position because you want to retain your guys, you want to retain your talent, but you got to make sure to do it at the right price. Those players are going to want fair compensation, or else why would they commit too early? I think that this number, 4 years, $112 million for Christian Braun, 4 years, $68 million for Peyton Watson, I think those two numbers are fair. I don't think that's that crazy. And I think the Nuggets fans should try to get used to those kinds of numbers if they can, because that's probably what it's going to take to get both of those deals done. So keep that in mind. Do your best to understand and appreciate that the salary cap is going up, that the numbers are going up, that this is a little bit different. This is not your father's NBA. Everybody's getting paid, man. Every single player. And you could either enjoy it and be willing to kind of accept it, or you can complain about it and you'll never get any good players, because all you'll ever get are 2 max contract players and then 18 minimum contracts. Maybe that's what people want, but I got to tell you, it's not really viable for the middle class of the NBA. All right, folks, that is going to do it for this episode of Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends here at Mile High Sports. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hope you enjoyed that particular episode. I think it's valuable. I think it's important to prep. These contracts may not be signed right now. They might have to wait. We might not hear about this until October. We'll find out, but I am very curious to see what the Nuggets ultimately do this offseason, and then this is, of course, a big byproduct of that. Everybody have a good weekend. I think I'm going to take the rest of the week off. I'll talk to you guys next week here on Pickaxe and Roll.